You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
COVID-19 is hitting the Chicago Bears about as hard as any other team in the NFL. So why isn't the league extending them the same precautions that they did for 3 other games and giving them the opportunity to at least push back the Bears' game against the Vikings a little while longer to let the team catch up? This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure that you're subscribed to the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our daily video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. On the show today, we're going to sort of take stock of who the Bears even have that will be available for them to play against the Minnesota Vikings, where the latest players added on the COVID list are coming from. The entire secondary is gone, plus a bunch of other key players, and why the Bears and Vikings aren't getting their game moved so far. Well, the NFL has already moved 3 other games for teams facing similar COVID issues. We'll also kind of take a look at what the Bears' plan is coaching-wise. We talked a little bit about what it could be. The Bears have said, okay, if our coordinators can't go, here's what we're going to do. So we'll take a closer look at quarterbacks coach John DeFilippo, senior defensive assistant Mike Pettin as well, and we will skip the assistant special teams coach. And we'll wrap up with just kind of a look at some of the craziness that happened during Sunday's game and how it affects the Bears and how it kind of compares to what we've seen from the Chicago Bears or what we should be seeing from the Chicago Bears to finish out this season compared to a team like the Detroit Lions, who just beat the Arizona Cardinals and certainly playing tough and not giving up at this stage in their season. But we have to talk Bears and COVID-19 because this team is getting decimated. Fortunately not, as far as we know, seriously ill, but just players landing on the reserve COVID-19 list and presumably going to be unable to go in this game. It's possible some of the players that landed on the list very early in this week could come back. Like I think we saw Eddie Goldman came off the COVID-19 list, as well as someone else. And I can't remember who the other, I think it was one of the backup linebackers, Kamara or whatever. A couple of players have come off, and it's possible between the time I'm recording this and the time kickoff starts that a few more players could come off, but the majority of the guys that have all been added to the list in the last couple of days are not going to be able to go on Monday. And it's to the point now where the Bears are missing, as of right now, I think 14 players on the reserve COVID-19 list, including their entire starting secondary. And it's ridiculous that we're not having these bigger conversations about the NFL moving this game back. And maybe by the time you listen to this, they will have wisened up and moved this game back. But there's 2 separate arguments here. There's the Bears are being clearly hit by COVID-19 in a way where they deserve to have their game moved back just to make it more of a fair contest. But then also beyond that, the thing that bothers me the most is that the NFL has already agreed to do this for 3 teams were affected enough for the league to push games back. If they hadn't pushed any games back this weekend, then I would be sitting here saying, well, tough, but every other team is having to deal with this too. But once the NFL created, call it an exception, I don't know what you want to call it. Once the NFL kind of said, all right, we're going to apply this new standard, whatever, there's not even a written standard of exactly how badly a team is supposed to be affected by COVID before they postpone a game. But the fact that they have extended that to some teams because they were fearing a competitive disadvantage, now all of a sudden the doors are open and the gates should be open and it should be available, that should be available to any team. And I get that you don't want to postpone every game. Not every team needs their games postponed, but it feels like the Chicago Bears are hitting this threshold of hey, wait a minute, maybe we should at least push this back a day, if not longer, to make sure that this team can still field something close to an NFL caliber roster, because certainly they weren't winning a lot of games before COVID-19. But now you look at players on their COVID-19 list include their entire starting secondary. So Jalen Johnson and Tashawn Gibson went on yesterday on Sunday onto the COVID-19 list. Eddie Jackson was already there. Artie Burns was already there. Duke Shelley was potentially going to come back this week from injury to be their slot cornerback again. He's on COVID-19. So all 5 of your top DBs across the board are on the reserve COVID-19 list. And I can tell you already that does not leave you with, let alone, quality starting caliber players, but barely even like a full allotment of defensive players. It's a little bit ridiculous just how low on talent this Bears team is going to be in the secondary. That all the guys that were sort of on your bench or benched is where you're going to have to go to in your starting lineup. This is not a group to write home about. It's going to be Kindle Vildor, Dion Bush, Tease Tabor, and I think Marquis Christian. I mean, they'll certainly be able to, call players up from the practice squad and try and get some different things in there. And like that's going to solve all the problems. No, like they'll get enough bodies physically on the team to be able to field the secondary. But when you have, again, your top names, Kindle Vildor, Dion Bush, and Jalen Tease Tabor, might be your part of your starting secondary. The secondary was bad when healthy, let alone trying to field that team. Plus the rest of the team, right? It's not just, they're all being hit at this one position group, right? Andy Dalton, Ryan Nall, Allen Robinson, Isaiah Coulter, Jesse James, Larry Borum, Mario Edwards Jr., Joel Iyebuniwe, Sam Kamara, and Duke Shelley are the 14 Bears on COVID. Plus, Jason Peters is ruled out with injury. Xavier Crawford ruled out with injury. Houston Carson also ruled out with injury. But 14 players, including a handful of starters there, unable to go in this game from the coronavirus. Seems like a pretty comparable with a lot of what the other teams are dealing with that had their games postponed. So why aren't the Bears and Vikings game getting that same standard? Is it because they're playing on Monday night anyway, and those games were all pushed back? I mean, to Monday night and Tuesday night, and one of them was going to be played on Saturday. So, I get it. The game was going to be early, so push it back a little bit. But, if you've already pushed one game to Tuesday, not that it's easy to postpone games. There's a logistical nightmare. But, once you've already engaged in that logistical nightmare, all those other games only got pushed back a day or two. So why can't you push the Bears game back another day, just to give them another day for some of those players to maybe start to come off of that COVID list? They just have to test negative twice across a 24-hour period. And if they're, if they got a case early in the week, most of them are vaccinated, so they presumably won't have as severe symptoms and should recover potentially faster than the unvaccinated players on the roster. So there's potential benefit to extending it at least a day. It's not going to solve all the problems and make the Bears that much better. It's not going to fix everything, get them fully healthy or whatever, but at least it's something to let them field some sort of roster of players that have actually played in NFL games before and can understand the scheme and the system. I mean, especially because you're not even going to have, presumably if you don't postpone the game, you might not even have any of your coordinators. The two names filling in there, John DeFilippo and Mike Pettin, next on Locked On Bears. You listen to podcasts like Locked On Bears for the power of knowledge. You switch to Boost Mobile for the power of saving money. Because with Boost Mobile, you get the power of a free 5G phone so you can listen to all the latest episodes of Locked On Bears or any of the great podcasts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You also get the power of 3 unlimited data lines for $30 a month per line. So your family can harness all that brain power too. And you get the power of one of America's largest 5G networks. So you can do all of that, all your podcast listening, your learning, your surfing, everything you do on your phones at the speed of 5G. With all the money you'll save and all the knowledge you'll gain, just how powerful will you become? Switch to Boost Mobile and find out. Get a free Samsung Galaxy A32 5G phone when you switch to one of America's largest 5G networks. More power to save. Boost Mobile. Free phone is limited to new customers and 1 per line. Additional restrictions apply. Offers and coverage are not available everywhere or for all phones and networks. You can see boostmobile.com for all the details. So the Bears have some plans in place here if their roster is not able to go, but if their coaching staff is not able to go, because as you may recall, offensive coordinator Bill Lazor, defensive coordinator Sean Desai, and special teams coordinator Chris Tabor all placed on the reserve COVID-19 list. They were early enough in the week, and they're all vaccinated to the point where it is possible 1 or 2 or even all 3, I guess, could potentially be activated for this game. Again, I believe they just need to have 2 negative tests over 24 hours, and it's possible that, hey, maybe they had one yesterday and get their second one today on Monday on game day, and then they're ready to go, and it doesn't become a big deal. But the Bears announced what their plan is, mostly, if their coordinators are not able to go. And in place of offensive coordinator Bill Lazor would be quarterbacks coach John DeFilippo acting as offensive coordinator. He also, I believe, has the title already of passing game coordinator, which doesn't mean a lot. I mean, other quarterbacks coach kind of do the same types of things. They work with the quarterbacks. Of course, they help with the passing game. But anyway, and then the defensive coordinator replacement would be senior defensive assistant Mike Pettin. And we talked through that a little bit last week on Friday's podcast, but we didn't know exactly what the plan was. And so we were kind of going more and over, like, here's a few things they could try and what exactly. But now that we know that it's John DeFilippo and Mike Pettin, I wanted to kind of take a minute to go through and like kind of take stock of like what we do know about them. And I guess the first thing we don't know, if Bill Lazor is unable to go, who will call the plays? I would guess, given that John DeFilippo has not been the coordinator all season, that Matt Nagy would resume play calling duties in Tabor's absence. John DeFilippo has called plays before. He was the Minnesota Vikings offensive coordinator. There's a very sort of strong potential of revenge game for DeFilippo to call plays against his former team and try and, show them what they're missing or whatever. Because Mike Zimmer fired John DeFilippo, did not want him as his play caller anymore. And it sounds like you read the reporting, there was some division between them. And he was at one point like kind of a hot up and coming coordinator, head coach type candidate guy, and then kind of fell off. So he was the quarterback's coach for the Philadelphia Eagles with Nick Foles, with Carson Wentz before they won the Super Bowl with Doug Peterson and was part of that staff. And he was kind of the quarterback, the guy who helped unlock Nick Foles and Carson Wentz, right? I mean, he was quote unquote developing those quarterbacks as part of that coaching staff. And so of course the Vikings wanted to make him their offensive coordinator and try and capture some of that with Kirk Cousins, but it didn't work nearly as well as the Vikings would have wanted. He inherited a really good Vikings team, and then they really were bad at running the ball, and their offensive line was terrible, and their passing game was just kind of okay. And I think what stands out to me with DeFilippo when it comes to taking over as the Bears offensive coordinator, even just now for one game, that Vikings team did have a really bad offensive line, and his Vikings offense really struggled to adapt to that. Like he's known as like a guy who wants to scheme up route concepts and like open up the passing game with smart, innovative play calling. But it seemed to me like he was someone who was a little bit more focused on plays and not as much players, right? He knew he had good wide receivers and a capable quarterback. So of course, he's like, yes, let's get the ball in my wide receiver's hands. And you see that there's logic there. He's not an idiot, but you have to take account how well your offensive line is going to be able to block up those plays. And maybe he wasn't realistic in his expectations there and wasn't then able to, again, adapt his offense to the weaknesses that he had and the players that he had, or some of the other plays. Like it was built for the wide receivers and quarterback that he had. Like he wasn't just ignoring all the players, but it never really worked out that well. Like they were one of the worst rushing teams in the league with Dalvin Cook, right? You know what I mean? Like we know Dalvin Cook is a great running back, and that was one of the big reported, disagreements between DeFilippo and Zimmer is that Zimmer wanted to run the ball and DeFilippo wanted to pass the ball. Like he loves the passing game and scheming it out. And all of that sounds really familiar to what we have in Chicago, right? Offensive line problems, struggling to adapt to those offensive line problems, a desire to throw the football a lot more than you run, despite having a talented running back in the backfield. And then DeFilippo also ended up throwing a lot of curl routes too. But if you really want to drive home all the Nagy comparisons there with what they seem like, you can see how he's a great fit on this Bears coaching staff and how they get so much great collaboration and synergy between the quarterback's coach, the offensive coordinator, and the head coach, because it seems like they're all in a lot of that same mindset of what they want their offense to look like. And so I wouldn't expect John DeFilippo to be much different than what we've seen from Nagy or Bill Lazor, regardless of who's calling plays. And I think there's some potential for some frustration, although I would like to see if Nagy's calling plays, how much he's maybe learned from not calling plays and seeing if he's able to, structure more of a full, complete game plan and then have plays actually build on each other, like the things you do in the first quarter help you set up what you're going to do in the third and fourth quarter. That those types of things that we don't really see as much in this Bears offense in the last 3 years. So, I'm not expecting a vast differences or fireworks from the offense. And honestly, defensively, I think it's a similar type of story. I think Mike Pettin was a better defensive coordinator, in Green Bay, for example, than John DeFilippo was an offensive coordinator in Minnesota. And this is not me just here to crap all over DeFilippo and Pettin, but it's just sort of here's what went wrong with them in their previous stops as to why they were available to the Bears and not why they're not currently coordinators and being just promoted into this role. But like in Pettin in Green Bay, there was a lot of frustration with like soft coverages and cornerbacks being well off of the opposing receivers and just giving them a lot of like free space. And I also felt like he was a lot of times too rigid in what he wanted to call and not always fully adapting to the opponents. Again, some similar with some DiFilippo similarities there of the like, understanding the players you're going against or playing with, as opposed to just the scheme and the play calls that you really believe work, right? You have to really be able to adapt. But like Packers fans were always frustrated with, a lot of those 3-man coverages, a lot of that free space and giving up yards way too easily, being able to say, you know what, they're going to be able to move the ball pretty well between the 20s and bend but don't break and really try and hold up in the red zone. And that was just not super sustainable with that Packers defense. There was some argument of talent deficiencies there too. Like, don't get me wrong. They had a little stretch there of not drafting and signing particularly well in that Packers defense. They were trying to find inside linebackers. They were trying to find cornerbacks. They got some rookies in there, but now they're developing into better players. Now that Pettin's gone, but there was some general manager blame, much like with DiFilippo in Minnesota. But you want your coach to be able to better adapt on both sides of the ball to the personnel that they have, and just didn't seem quite like either Pettin or DiFilippo were able to do it with their respective teams and their respective sides of the ball. Now, is that going to be a massively different from what the Bears were getting from Sean Desai? That defensive coordinator, probably not. You know what I mean? Like, not that he was. I don't think Desai was too rigid necessarily, but sometimes the coverage was a little bit soft and a little bit off. We saw a lot of those 3-man rushes last week, so like, I don't know that everything is going to be worlds different. Curious to see just how different it might be with different coordinators in there, and you can be sure we will be keeping a close eye and breaking that all down for you after the game as well. But with this sort of Monday game, I wanted to also look back at the games on Sunday, and I was struck a little bit by losing like bad teams winning those games, and I feel like it brings in a point where we can talk about the Bears in comparison, not just what we've seen, but also what we want to see from them for the rest of this season. Next on Locked On Bears. This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or sometimes, honestly, even better than a candy bar. They're called Built Bars. They are the world's best tasting protein bars. I just reordered a box for myself. I've got some on my way right now. They actually have a factory second sale going on as well. There's a lot of different ways you can finally try Built Bars if you haven't tried them yet, because they really do taste delicious. They're all covered in 100% real chocolate. They're soft. They're easy to chew, but most importantly, low sugar, low calories, high fiber, high protein. You cannot find a protein bar product on the market that has that combination of macronutrients and then also tasting this good. Promise you will find a flavor you love. Head on over to built.com, enter in our promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. The coronavirus has shifted the betting line at betonline.ag for this Bears-Vikings game. Not too surprising, as Bears starters drop like flies. The line has moved to Bears plus 6.5. You're looking for the spread there. If you just want to bet the Bears straight up on the money line, it's Bears plus 235. If you think they can band together and pull off the upset, you'll get a pretty darn good return on your investment there. And I believe the point total has gone down a little bit to 44.5 is where the over-under is set. And if you want to lay some money down in this game, make it a little bit more exciting in that primetime action, betonline.ag is the place to do it. It's the number one place not only for your NFL, college football, basketball, hockey, soccer, tennis, baseball season when it starts coming back up. Plus, they have your favorite Vegas casino games online as well. So don't wait to take advantage of everything they're available this season and all throughout the rest of the year. Head on over to betonline.ag, sign up today, receive a free account, and you're going to get a 50% welcome bonus if you enter in our promo code LOCKED ON. They're going to give you 50% of the money back to you, extra bonus, free money to play with at BetOnline, where the game starts. Looking at these other games, when the Bears don't play on Sunday, and you can kind of watch some of these other teams. Watching the Lions fight and hold on and take down the Arizona Cardinals pretty well struck me as a team that doesn't give up, hasn't given up, and fights for their coach and is tough. And it struck me as we start to hear more about the Bears locker room maybe starting to split and certainly questioning the effort of some certain individual number one wide receivers and maybe top safeties and, other players across the roster that you just wonder whether they're giving their all. It was a striking comparison of like a team like the Lions that has been able to band together. And I don't want this to be like, hey, the Bears should be more like the 2-win Lions team. Like, no, that's not the point. The Lions are not necessarily doing everything perfectly the right way. Like, I think a lot of the Dan Campbell, tough guy, bite your kneecaps and drink 40 gallons of coffee a day stuff is, it's dumb. I don't know if dumb's the right word, but it's like, this is the NFL. Like, everyone is tough in the NFL. And some that's just like a little bit too, I don't know if it's showy or flashy, or it's just like, come on, like, it's unnecessary, right? Like, you can come out and say like, hey, we're going to really prioritize being a tough football team. Like Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, like that is a football team that emphasizes toughness. I think more so even than a lot of other teams in the NFL. But Bill Belichick doesn't have to come out and say ridiculous things to try and hammer that home to the media, the public, or whatever. And like, is it causing harm when Dan Campbell does that stuff? Probably not, but I think it makes him look kind of dumb. And I mean, regardless, like, there's something to be said about being that kind of tough football team. Again, not that the Lions are the exact way to do it, but the way that they're able to fight and like not give up, and also like play better than like the quality of players that they have, right? We talk about like, you think about quarterbacks elevating the level of play around them, but from a coaching staff standpoint, like being able to get more out of lower caliber players, to me, tends to be a sign of quality coaching, as opposed to like if you have a team where you have players that are normally high talent guys playing below their talent level, Eddie Jackson, Allen Robinson, etc. Like, that tends to me to signal maybe coaching staff not getting as much out of its players. But like, this Lions team is bad, but they have a lot of young players who we saw in the game against the Cardinals are getting better and growing into their role as the season's got on. And I just don't know that there are very many players on the Bears roster right now that you can point to and say, this player is growing and getting better as the season goes on. Justin Fields, sure, yes. Not Cole Kmet anymore. He was getting better and has kind of trailed off. I mean, Darnell Mooney, I guess, he's good. I mean, like, Darnell Mooney is good. And so, like, are they developing him into something better, or is he just, I don't give him credit. We can even give him credit for Darnell Mooney. How about that? We'll give him that. Jalen Johnson is getting incrementally better. Yeah, he's playing well. I don't know that he's gotten like worlds better, but right. But like, you look across that Lions team and like, they've got Amon-Ra St. Brown and Khalif Raymond catching their touchdown passes. And like, if you could name a Lions defensive starter off the top of your head without looking, I would be very impressed. Like, yeah, I think Tracy Walker's been there for a few years, so maybe you get that one. And like, I think they brought in Julian Okwara. I remember him in the draft, and they have former Bear Nick Williams. Maybe you just remember him. I kind of forgot they have Michael Brockers from the Rams, but you know what I mean. But it's like, they're taking low quality players, and they just beat the Falcons, and they beat the Vikings, and we might see the Bears lose to the Vikings, and we saw the Bears lose to the Cardinals, right? And the Lions are beating teams that the Bears have lost to. They've beaten two of those teams that the Bears have lost to. Not that makes the Lions automatically better than the Bears, but I just see these comparisons, and it strikes me that like, the Bears are a 4-win team, and we're having these sort of questions about giving up and all that, and it feels like the Lions haven't quite gotten to that point, despite losing so many more games. And it's very, it's not a one-to-one comparison, and it's a different sort of thing, but it just, that struck me watching games on Sunday. And the other thing that struck me too is the Ravens against the Packers. Going in with your backup quarterback, Huntley, who we saw against the Bears is a very good backup quarterback. So like, it's not a like, whoa, are the Ravens necessarily, but like, they got down 14 in the fourth quarter, and I stopped watching that game. I was at an establishment with my friends watching the Packers game, and we left in the fourth quarter when the Ravens were down 14. It was like, oh, well, Aaron Rodgers just, the Ravens went for it on fourth down. They didn't get it. Rodgers got a field goal. They went up 14. This game's over. And like, we looked later that night and we're like, oh, 31-30. Like, oh, the Packers almost lost that game. The Ravens went for 2 and lost. Like, apparently it was an exciting, fun finish. And I didn't watch it. I did not watch the end of that game. I watched most of the rest of that game. But like, for the fact that the Ravens, like, didn't give up, fought down to the end, and got within the point of a 2-point conversion to win that game with their backup quarterback, plus a defense that was really struggling. I think they were like, right now, like towards the bottom of the NFL in pass defense against Aaron Rodgers. Like, again, team overcoming they're getting their lesser players to play better and overcoming this adversity and hanging in these games and fighting tough, that I don't fully see the Bears do that. And I'm curious, with 4 games left, and we get quotes from Jalen Johnson about the locker room. Not everybody is fighting hard right now. And like the coaches have kind of like said, like, yeah, we hear the rumors about being fired, and we're all sort of presuming that Nagy's going to be fired. And like, there's not a lot of reason for this team to be super motivated and amped up. Curious to see how they respond. Do they quit and give up in a way that maybe the Lions haven't? And what does that say about this team, these coaches, these players, this organization, and where it stands right now? That's kind of the food for thought that I was left with from the Sunday slate of games. But hey, we're still locked in on Bears-Vikings Monday night. You can be sure we will break that game down for you Tuesday morning, first thing in the morning. Podcast will be right here for you. So make sure that you hit the best way to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for a second listen, now that we're wrapping up, Locked On Vikings with Luke Braun, if you want that last-minute scouting report on the Bears' opponent, or Locked On Bets is our Locked On Podcast Network betting podcast, helping you win money with our friends at BetOnline as well. So plenty of goodies to go around. Win, lose, or draw, whatever happens on Monday Night Football, or if they push it back, podcast will be right here for you to help you bear down.